From Doolittle to the Deep. The story of the USS Hornet CV-8 is one of the most incredible tales from the Second World War. But to understand why finding her was so shocking, you first have to understand the legend. You see, this wasn't just any ship, this was a ship that seemed to be forged in fire and destined for greatness, all in an impossibly short amount of time. Her story began in the shipyards of Newport News, Virginia. She was launched in December 1940. A world away from the conflict that was already swallowing Europe and Asia. When she was commissioned in October 1941, she was a marvel of modern engineering. As a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier, she was the pinnacle of naval power. We're talking about a vessel over 800 feet long, that's almost 3 football fields, and weighing more than 25,000 tons. She was designed to be a floating fortress, a movable airport that could carry over 70 aircraft, projecting American power anywhere in the world. Her engines could push her through the water at over 32 knots, making her one of the fastest capital ships afloat. But the thing nobody tells you is that her peacetime career was practically non-existent. Just 7 weeks after her commissioning ceremony, the world changed forever. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, plunged the United States into the war. The Hornet, still so new that her crew was barely settled in, was immediately thrown into the fire. Her first major operation wasn't just a mission, it was a gamble so audacious, so desperate that it bordered on madness. It was April 1942. The U.S. was reeling, suffering defeat after defeat across the Pacific. Morale was at rock bottom. President Roosevelt wanted a way to strike back, to prove that Japan was not invincible. The plan they devised was to fly U.S. Army bombers off the deck of a Navy carrier and hit Tokyo itself. This had never, ever been done. Army B-25 Mitchell bombers were heavy twin-engine land planes. They were never designed to take off from the short pitching deck of a carrier. To even try it, the planes were stripped of every non-essential piece of equipment. Extra fuel tanks were crammed into every available space, including the walkways. The plane's crews, led by the legendary Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, trained in secret, learning to haul their massive bombers into the air with only a few hundred feet of runway, a feat that seemed to defy physics. On April 18, 1942, the Hornet, loaded with 16 of these massive bombers lashed to her deck, sailed deep into enemy waters. Spotted by a Japanese patrol boat, they were forced to launch early, hundreds of miles farther out than planned. One by one, those B-25s roared down the Hornet's deck and climbed into the sky. It was a one-way trip. The Hornet had pulled off the impossible. The Doolittle Raid did little physical damage to Tokyo, but the psychological impact was staggering. It shattered the Japanese belief that their homeland was untouchable and gave America its first great victory. The Hornet was instantly a legend. But her work was just getting started. Only 2 months later, in June 1942, she sailed into the battle that would change the entire course of the war, the Battle of Midway. Here, alongside her sister ships, the Enterprise and the Yorktown, the Hornet's air group swarmed the Japanese fleet. It was a brutal, desperate fight. Hornet's planes helped cripple the Japanese carrier force, sending 4 of their best carriers to the bottom of the ocean. Midway broke the back of the Japanese Navy. The tide of the war in the Pacific had turned, and the Hornet was right at the center of it. Many people get crazy about these victories, but they often forget that in war, luck is a currency that eventually runs out. The Hornet pressed on, fighting in the brutal campaign for Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. By the fall of 1942, the U.S. carrier force was stretched dangerously thin. The Saratoga was damaged, the Wasp was sunk, and the Enterprise was in for repairs. For a time, the Hornet was the only operational American carrier in the entire South Pacific. She was a lone sentinel, holding the line. Her end came in October 1942 at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. A massive Japanese fleet ambushed the American force. The Hornet, the most valuable target on the board, was subjected to an attack of terrifying intensity. Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes swarmed her. To put it mildly, she was finished. In a coordinated assault, she was hit by 3 bombs, 2 aerial torpedoes, and 2 Japanese planes that deliberately crashed into her. She was torn open and uncontrollable fires raged below decks. Her engines went silent. She was dead in the water. The crew fought like lions to save her, but the damage was catastrophic. The order was given to abandon ship. But here's the kicker, the Hornet refused to sink. She was built that tough. The U.S. destroyers accompanying her were ordered to scuttle her, to keep her from being captured. They pumped over 400 5-inch shells and 9 torpedoes into her burning hull. And she still floated. As the Japanese fleet closed in, the American destroyers had to flee. It was Japanese destroyers that finally delivered the last torpedoes that sent the legend on her final journey. She slipped beneath the waves and vanished, taking the stories of her final moments and over 140 of her crew with her. For 77 years, her exact location remained a total mystery, a ghost story whispered by sailors. That is, until the research vessel Patrol went looking for her. The search for a ship that took that much punishment is a desperate task. The $10 million gamble. For decades, the Hornet was more myth than reality. Everyone knew she was lost somewhere in the vast, empty expanse of the Solomon Islands, but somewhere in the Pacific Ocean is an area larger than all the continents combined. And the thing nobody tells you is that the ocean in this region isn't just wide, it's unfathomably deep. We're talking depths of 2, 3, and even 4 miles. It's a place of eternal darkness and crushing pressure. Finding a single shipwreck there is harder than finding a shoebox in New York City. At night, from a helicopter. For 77 years, the sea held the Hornet close, a secret it seemed determined to keep. Many in the naval history community believed she would be lost forever, swallowed by the pressure and buried under decades of silt. But that all changed because of one man, Paul Allen. The co-founder of Microsoft was also a passionate historian and philanthropist, and he poured hundreds of millions of dollars into his own private exploration team. His research vessel, the RV Petrel, wasn't a billionaire's yacht. It was quite simply the most advanced deep-sea exploration vessel on the planet. Its mission? To find the lost ghosts of World War II. The hunt for the Hornet began not at sea but in dusty archives. This is the part many people overlook. The Petrel's team of researchers and historians spent months digging through mountains of old Navy records. They were looking for any clue. They cross-referenced the logbooks of the 9 different American warships that were with the Hornet in her final agonizing hours. Each ship had recorded its own set of coordinates, its own bearings, and its own description of the battle. The problem? In the chaos of a naval battle with shells exploding and ships dodging torpedoes, these records were often contradictory. They formed a tangled, confusing web of numbers. The team's job was to untangle that web. They fed all this data into a sophisticated computer program, creating a probability box, a massive 500-square-mile patch of the ocean floor where the Hornet most likely came to rest. It was still a needle in a haystack, but at least they now knew which haystack to search. With a search grid defined, the high-tech toys came out. The Petrel wasn't just going to sail around looking. She was going to deploy her secret weapon, an autonomous underwater vehicle, or AUV. Think of the AUV as a brilliant 20-foot-long robotic torpedo packed with advanced sonar. The team would program it, drop it over the side, and it would dive all by itself to the crushing depth of 17,000 feet. For over 20 hours at a time, it would mow the lawn, flying about 100 feet above the seabed, sending out sonar pings. These pings would bounce back, creating a black and white shadow image of the ocean floor. For weeks, the AUV methodically swept the search grid. It would dive, search, surface, recharge, download its data, and dive again. The crew on the Petrel would stare at these fuzzy sonar images looking for anything that wasn't mud. They were looking for a hard edge, a straight line, a shadow that didn't belong. And then on January 20th, 2019, it happened. The AUV returned from a dive and uploaded its data. And there, in the middle of a vast, empty field of silt, was a blip. It wasn't a rock. It was massive. It was long, flat, and had the unmistakable angles of a man-made object. The shape was a perfect match for a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier. The thing nobody tells you about this work is that this is the moment of truth. A sonar shadow is one thing, seeing it is another. The crew immediately prepared the other piece of gear, the Tethered Remote-Operated Vehicle, or ROV. This machine is their eyes. It's a boxy, car-sized robot connected to the Petrel by a 10-mile-long fiber optic cable. It's armed with powerful lights and high-definition cameras. This is the vehicle that would make the final identification. Slowly, agonizingly, the ROV began its descent. It took over 2 hours for the drone to fall through the 3+ miles of dark, cold water. The crew watched the depth gauge climb, 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet. The pressure was building to levels that are hard to even imagine. Here's a wow factor for you. The pressure at that depth is over 7,800 pounds per square inch. A modern billion-dollar U.S. Navy attack submarine would be crushed long before it ever reached this depth. The ROV was entering a realm more hostile than outer space. Finally, the ROV reached the bottom, 17,500 feet. The pilot switched on the sonar and picked up the target just a few hundred yards away. He aimed the drone and pushed the throttle forward. The crew in the control room stared at a black screen, waiting. Then out of the darkness, a shadow emerged, a massive sheer wall of steel rising from the mud. The pilot turned on the high-powered lights, and there she was, the ghost of the Pacific. They had found the Hornet, but what they were about to see was shocking. The aircraft on the hangar deck. When the ROV's powerful lights, brighter than stadium lights, cut through the eternal darkness and hit the wreck, the control room on the Petrel went dead silent. The team had braced themselves for what they should have found. Remember, this ship took hundreds of shells and more than a dozen torpedoes. It was a burning wreck before it even sank. It then fell 3 miles, tumbling end over end, hitting the seabed with the force of a small atomic bomb. They expected a debris field, a mangled pile of unrecognizable, corroded steel, a scrapyard. What they saw instead was a ghost. At 17,500 feet in the near-freezing, high-pressure darkness, the USS Hornet was shockingly, unbelievably preserved. She was sitting upright on the ocean floor as if she had just landed there. As the explorers piloted the RO-5 over the deck, the first impossible sight came into view. A 5-inch gun turret. It was still standing proudly, its twin barrels aimed up toward a surface they would never see again. It was as if it was still waiting for the order to fire. The gun hadn't collapsed. It wasn't crushed. It was almost perfect. The cameras moved on, revealing more. The 1.1-inch anti-aircraft Chicago piano guns were still locked in position, their quad barrels pointing skyward, ready to defend against planes that had vanished 77 years ago. It was eerie. It felt as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. The ocean had not scattered them. It had sealed them in place. Then the ROV descended into the gaping opening of the aircraft elevator, moving down into the hangar deck. And there, sitting in the silt, was a sight so ordinary it was surreal. It was an International Harvester aircraft tug. The small green tow vehicle was sitting perfectly upright as if it was just waiting to haul a plane. Here's the kicker. The researchers on the video feed pointed out its black rubber tires. They still looked inflated, after decades under pressure that can crush steel. How was this possible? But that wasn't even the most stunning part. The hangar deck was a museum of lost aircraft. The ROV's lights picked out the shape of an SBD Dauntless dive bomber resting on its belly, its wings torn, but its fuselage intact. A few yards away was a TBD Devastator torpedo bomber. And then they saw the most incredible sight of all, a Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighter plane. It wasn't a pile of wreckage. The plane was resting on the deck and its wings were still neatly folded back in the storage position, just as a deckhand would have left it. The U.S. star insignia was still faintly visible on the side. What many overlooked is why this was so strange. This ship didn't gently slide into the water. It was a chaotic, violent sinking. How was a delicate aircraft, with hollow aluminum wings, not shattered into a million pieces by the descent and impact? The ROV pulled back and moved along the hull, and there on the ship's stern, the camera's lights caught it. Painted in faded white but still perfectly clear, the number 8. This was the final haunting confirmation. This was Hornet CV-8. Every detail told the same story. The ship was heavily damaged from the battle. You could see the massive gaping torpedo holes and the buckled, twisted flight deck. But the parts that weren't hit by weapons were preserved by the environment. Scientists call it a perfect storm of preservation. The extreme cold, just above freezing, The total lack of sunlight and, most importantly, the anoxia, a complete lack of oxygen, meant that rust and decay simply stopped. The ship was a time capsule pickled in its own cold, dark grave. But as the team documented the exterior, they saw a large, dark opening in the side of the hull, a wound from one of the final torpedoes. This opening led deep into the ship's interior. The mission was about to change. They were going to do something incredibly risky, take the drone inside the hull. The exterior was a miracle of preservation. What was inside, however, was a miracle of physics. The chilling secret of the sick bay. The decision to go inside the hull was not made lightly. This is, without a doubt, the most dangerous and nerve-wracking thing you can do with a multi-million-dollar ROV. The wreck of the Hornet is a dark maze of collapsed decks, hanging wires, and razor-edge debris. One wrong move, one snag on the drone's fiber optic tether, and the mission is over. The ROV would be lost forever, tethered to the ghost ship it was sent to explore. But the wow factor of what they might find, the unknown, was too strong to ignore. The pilot, a master of his craft, used tiny, precise bursts from the thrusters to guide the ROV. He navigated it through the black, gaping torpedo hole, a wound over 30 feet wide. The drone's powerful lights pushed back the darkness inside the ship's hull for the first time in over 7 decades. The sonar painted a confusing, claustrophobic picture of collapsed bulkheads and debris. They were maneuvering through what was once a crew berthing area, now a twisted junkyard. Then they saw an intact hatchway. A sign next to it, its letters still legible, read, "Sick Bay." This was it. The team in the control room, thousands of feet above on the surface, held its breath. The pilot eased the drone through the doorway. They were now inside a sealed compartment, a room that had been plunged into the abyss in 1942. What they saw next is the part that truly defies logic. The room was not a mangled, silt-filled pile of debris, it was preserved. In the center of the room, a metal examination table was overturned, a sign of the ship's violent descent. But against the far bulkhead, a metal medical cabinet was still bolted to the wall. Its glass-paneled door had been shattered by the pressure. But the shelves inside were intact. And on those shelves, the ROV's high-definition camera zoomed in. There was a rack of glass medical vials. They were standing upright, unbroken, seemingly still filled with liquid. To put it mildly, the crew on the Petrel was stunned. This shouldn't be possible. This ship plummeted 3 miles. The descent would have subjected every part of the ship to catastrophic pressure changes, a force called hydrostatic shock. Any pocket of air, like the air inside a sealed glass vial, should have caused it to implode violently. Yet here they were, dozens of them, perfect. But that wasn't all. As the drone's lights panned across the room, it caught something else. Floating in the dead-still water, almost perfectly in the center of the room, was a leather-bound book. It was floating open, its pages fanned out. The camera moved in closer. It was a ship's logbook. And the pages were perfect. They weren't a pulpy, disintegrated mass of cellulose, which is what happens to paper in salt water. The pages looked white. The ink looked dark. The crew reported they could almost read the writing. This is the discovery that has baffled scientists and sent researchers down a rabbit hole. Paper, leather, and hollow glass vials should not exist in this state. The pressure, the violence, the decades of immersion, it all adds up to total destruction. Yet it was all there. This is where the wild theories begin. What force could have preserved this room? Theory 1, the chemical soup. This is the most grounded theory. The sick bay would have been full of chemicals. Formaldehyde, alcohol, iodine, and who knows what else. When the ship sank, these containers broke, mixing with the diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and seawater to create a unique, toxic preservative brine. This chemical soup could have pickled the room, tanning the leather book and stopping the paper from disintegrating. It's plausible. Theory 2, the perfect flood. This theory focuses on the glass vials. The only way they could survive is if the pressure inside and outside equalized instantly. This means the room must have flooded so perfectly and so immediately that not a single air pocket was trapped. The water would have rushed in from all sides at once, a 1 in a trillion event, sparing the glass from the shock of implosion. Theory 3, the flash freeze. This one is a bit wilder. Some have suggested that as the massive steel ship plunged into the 3-mile deep abyss, it passed through an extreme thermal layer, a pocket of super-chilled water so fast that the contents of the sick bay were flash frozen almost instantly. This freeze-dried state, combined with the pressure, locked the room in time before decay could even begin. Theory 4. The quantum lock. Now we get really weird. This is the theory you'll find in the darkest corners of internet forums. It suggests that the combination of factors, the exact depth, the exact pressure, nearly 8,000 psi, the unique metallic signature of the wreck, and the exact chemical composition of the water created a quantum-locked field, a bubble of reality where the normal laws of entropy and decay are suspended. In this theory, the room isn't just preserved, it's frozen in time. The book isn't floating, it's held in a state of perfect equilibrium. This last theory is, of course, pure speculation, but looking at the footage, it's easy to see why people are so mesmerized. The team recorded the footage, their minds racing. They knew they were looking at something that science, as we know it, would have a very hard time explaining. The book, floating as if held by an invisible hand, was an image no one on that ship would ever forget. The drone backed out, leaving the impossible room and its chilling secrets to the eternal dark. The mystery will remain. Deep down in the silent, crushing dark where the Hornet lies, there are stories that steel and impossible artifacts cannot fully tell. These are the human stories, and some of them lived on, carried in the memories of the men who once walked her decks. Men like Richard Nowatzki. When the world learned that the RV Petrel had found the Hornet, Richard was 95 years old. He was one of the last living survivors. He had been an 18-year-old gunner's mate on that final, terrible day in October 1942. When he spoke of it, his words were sharp, the memories as clear as if they happened yesterday. He described the chaos, the noise, the fear. They used armor-piercing bombs, he recalled in an interview. Now when they come down, you hear them going through the decks, plink, 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 and then when they explode, the whole ship shakes. The thing nobody tells you is what happens when these veterans see their past resurrected. The research team showed Richard the high-definition footage from the ROV. He sat there silently, watching the ghostly images. The camera panned across a 5-inch gun mount, the one that was still pointing to the sky. He recognized it instantly. It was the very position he had manned during the Hornet's final stand. Seeing it there, 3 miles beneath the waves, perfectly preserved, was like watching time itself bend. It was a reunion, and even in that heavy, emotional moment, his spirit was bright. "If you go down to my locker," he joked to the crew, "there's $40 in it, you can have it." That humanity, that spark of life, is the real core of the story. The truth is, the Hornet's discovery is not just about a scientific mystery. It's about sacrifice. Over 140 crewmen never made it home from that battle. Their lives ended in the fire, the smoke, and the water. The wreck, for all its scientific wonders and wild theories, is a tomb. It is a war grave, a place where bravery and tragedy are forever locked together. For the survivors and the thousands of family members, the discovery offered something that had been missing for over 75 years. Closure. The Hornet was no longer lost. She had a resting place, and the U.S. Navy, in accordance with federal and international law, has declared the site protected. So what really happened in that sick bay? Are we missing a key detail? Is this a quantum-locked miracle or something more down to earth? The thing is, scientists and naval historians have a much simpler, more logical explanation. The wild theories, while fun, are probably not the answer. The most likely scenario is a combination of Theory 1 and Theory 2. The room flooded almost instantly, a perfect, catastrophic flood that equalized the pressure and prevented the glass vials from imploding. Then, over the next few hours and days, the lack of oxygen, the extreme cold, and the chemical soup from the ship's own ruptured supplies went to work. They pickled the compartment, stopping the paper and leather from decaying. It's not a miracle, it's just a 1 in a billion combination of physics and chemistry. But here's the kicker. We will likely never know for sure. The Hornet is a protected grave. The RV Petrel team was there to observe, to document, and to honor. They did not and will not ever recover anything. That logbook will never be read. Those vials will never be tested. The ship will not be disturbed. The perfectly impossible room with its floating book and unbroken vials will remain just as it is, a logic-defying puzzle 3 miles beneath the waves. The mystery in the end is part of the Hornet's final, silent legacy. The Hornet's secrets are safe for now, but does discovering a grave like this give us knowledge, or does it just disturb those who rested in peace? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.